We are presenting Analysis and Annotated Guide of Era Apacible El Dia by Rosalía de Castro as a formal submission to the Undergraduate Symposium for Research and Scholarship. The project participants are myself, Emily Meyer, Gabriella Spatz, and Celeste Vanfossen.
This project was initiated by Professor Ferrando Valero from the World Languages Department. It is a participation in course Spanish 4420, labeled a 19th century Spanish Peninsular Literature course. Additional requirements were set for groups planning to submit to CURS and the open source textbook referred to on the next slide. Our objective was to analyze a selected work of Spanish literature from the 19th century. The analysis was to relate the historical, cultural, and social aspects of 19th century Spain to our selected text. Our goal was to annotate the selected work to improve reader comprehension for those learning Spanish.
Our scholarly directives were how to help define aspects of 19th century literature to help Spanish language learners better comprehend the full impact and context of a literary work. We had 3 secondary scholarly directives, one of which is what methods of annotation Spanish language learners are better able to comprehend. Our 3rd directive is how to better include women within the canon of Spanish literature. And our final directive was how to prepare complex text for informative reading by editing and creating materials and annotations. Our methodology in this project started with choosing the poem Era Apacible El Dia by Rosalía de Castro. We first researched her history and family life to understand her personal means and methods, and then researched the historical context and other works to better understand the politics, gender, and family life related to the poem. We then created annotations in the form of footnotes to help readers better understand the poem.
The background of Rosalía de Castro. She was born in 1837 in Galicia, Spain, in Santiago de Compostela. Her parents were Teresa de Castro and Jose Martinez Viejo. Viejo was a priest, and because of this, her birth was considered illegitimate because her parents could not marry. Rosalía lived with her grandmother during the first 8 years of her life, and then while she was living with her grandmother, she then attended school, and this was her first introduction to literature and theater. Rosalía married Manuel Marriga in 1858, and they together had 7 children, one of which died from falling off a table, named Adriano, in which has a strong presence within the poem that we chose. She then died of uterine cancer in 1885.
Our poem, Era Apacible El Dia, was a part of a works labeled En las Orillas de Sar, which was originally published in 1884. En las Orillas de Sar, it is a collection of Castro's writings and poems. When it was first published, success was slow. However, in 1885, it was reprinted by the typographic establishment of Ricardo Fay, and that caused great success in Madrid, Cuba, Galicia, and Italy.
To fully understand this poem in all of its context, it is important to research the 19th century Spanish history and literature that surrounds it. During this time, Spain was experiencing endless wars, health crises, economic upheaval, and various levels of industrial development in cities across the country. So especially in the late 1800s, small conflicts coincided with the Spanish-Moroccan Wars to create various levels of nationalism and patriotism among Spaniards in different regions. In Galicia specifically, struggles for control began, and several authors worked to preserve the cultural experience through written works, as well as the native languages and cultural practices of Galicia specifically. Castro's collection in Las Orillas de Sar expresses political and social statements in the style of Spanish Romanticism, which was the primary style of the 19th century. This style pursues free expression, intimacy, and exposure of emotions, as well as the true expression of all types of cultural identities, which is part of the reason she utilized it in this collection.
More specifically, Castro in Spain in the 19th century. Many of her works were set in Lestrobe, Galicia, which is a small village in Spain where Castro was born. In her later years, she was a forerunner of the cultural Regordimiento of Galicia, which was a movement of cultural and social expression in order to preserve Galician language and writings because they were the target of the oppressions that were being protested. Castro was also an important feministic voice of 19th century Spain. Here we have included our poem, Apacible, and we have added line numbers and footnotes to reference after we conclude our presentation. Next, we will discuss our footnotes and words to know in more detail.
To begin, the first word that is very important to understand is apacible, which means tranquil and calmly. This is important because it is the adjective in the title of the poem. The title of the poem is the first impression that the reader receives and sets up the melancholy and complicated narrative that follows throughout the poem. The second word that is important to understand is masamente, which means meekly or docile. This word is used to describe the scenario and atmosphere within the poem. Another word to understand is ensepluto, which means to be unburied in the context of a body. This is the description of Castro's son's body named Adriano. It helps the readers to understand the presence of Adriano's dead body in relation to the author and her internal struggle. Another word is sosiegar, which means to appease, mitigate, or calm. This word is important because it displays the author's feelings. In the Spanish infinitive, this means to calm down. The spelling is not correct in today's Spanish language, so it is important that we give a detailed analysis of the word and its uses. And finally, an important word to understand is sepulcro, which means tomb or funeral construction. This word gives historical context and references as respect for the death of ancestral relatives.
So for this presentation, we've chosen to elaborate specifically on a few specific footnotes. These we believe to have more historical and political context. So starting out, we're going to reference footnote number 3. So Rosalía de Castro uses genocentric language, which means language that centers around gender, specifically around the female gender. She uses this language in many of her works and in this poem specifically, and she expands on her experiences within this poem as a mother, to better relate the female experience with others who are reading it. She wanted to convey themes of love and pain to the world with her writing, and it is important to understand as well that in Galician culture, women were often forced to serve in the roles of mother and father, while husbands went away to find work. Therefore, Rosalía de Castro's experience was more than just relaying her time as a woman and as a mother, but also highlighting her Galician culture as a whole in this poem. Our second reference that we wanted to highlight was footnote number 7. So this talks about the historical context during the 19th century in Spain. In many 19th century Spanish poems, authors express a strong relationship with nature and naturalism. So Rosalía de Castro attaches her works and sentimentality to her homeland of Galicia and to the beautiful natural features that she remembers from it. She's specifically attached to the trees and the ocean she asked to visit on her dying days shortly after writing this poem. So for her, the elements of nature hold emotions and meaning that link people to the earth and to each other. Those two specific lines that we highlighted in this poem refer to natural elements that grow despite sad or tragic events like death and perpetuate the theme of life as a circular cycle rather than a stagnant one. Next, we wanted to highlight some more footnotes that were important to us. So number 12 is one specifically. So during Romanticism, the citizens of Galicia used many words to describe emotions that were deep or complex. Rosalía de Castro uses one of these words, saudade, which has no direct English translation in many of her works. Although this word is not present in the poem, Rosalía refers to feelings of extreme melancholy, sadness, and loneliness often in this poem, and speaks of emotions that remain within our souls or entrails or insides. Her unique use of this language intentionally uses subjectivity and sentimentality to convey the various phases of an intense emotion. None of her poems or her vocabulary remain on the surface level. They go deeper into what she wants to convey about an emotion over time. Our final one that we wanted to highlight is in reference to the poem as a whole. This poem is written in the specific style known as an elegy. An elegy is a work of written lamentation. It often contains descriptions of funerals or burials, and also includes relationships with natural elements, as well as lines or stanzas that speak of the injustices of death and short death or early death. Elegies follow these guidelines, but not in a specific writing style. This is why they are able to be adapted and have been written by countless authors since the 16th century.
We have also included some discussion questions as part of our project. Many of our discussion questions focus around the theme of her country of Galicia, nationalism, words and the elements of the poem, as well as feminism, Rosalía and her family and her relationship with her family, as well as the history of Spain. An example of this would be the fifth one, in which it says, the poem was published in 1844. How can we see the history of Spain in the poem? How did the importance of religion in Spain impact the poem, the government, other ideas, concepts, things from the 1800s?
Our next steps for our project is to participate in a peer review with similar research projects from the same course. Then we will submit our work to the Antología Abierta de Literatura Hispánica, which is an open source online textbook, in hopes of becoming published in order to help other Spanish learners comprehend this poem better. In conclusion, we were able to use our skills of editing and evaluating literature to create an analyzed product that can be used to help other students gather a greater understanding of the text. We found that descriptive definitions and detailed logistics clarifying the poem work best in increasing comprehension. Lastly, we recognize the importance of Castro in 19th century Spain, with her presence in the Regordimiento and as a female leader in literature. She was innovative and progressive in her time, and was able to create a legacy of a compelling writer. At the end of our presentation, we have included a bibliography, as you can use these sources to gather more information about Castro and 19th century Spain. After this, we've included our work cited, which includes all of these sources that we have cited in our presentation and our research. This then concludes our presentation. We thank you for your attention and your time.